Welcome to HortTube. My name is Putnam. I've been doing a series of videos here on the channel with my favorite monthly flowering plant. And here in Raleigh and further south, we can have something flowering pretty much year round. We might get a cold enough period in the winter that'll shut winter flowering things down, but there's almost always something pretty much every month. September is definitely going to be Lantana. Lantana for us in Raleigh really doesn't kick in until about midsummer, and then it will just continue to grow and bloom very quickly right through the early to mid-fall until we get some sort of frost to actually set it back. Here in my area, we have, this is zone 7B in Raleigh, North Carolina. There's a list of hardy ones that I'll give a little later in the video that pretty reliably come back in our area, but not all do. These are actually mostly, this family of, this is in the verbena family, first of all, and I'll talk about the flowers on these in just a minute, but it's in the verbena family. This genus Lantana has about 150 species. Lantana camara is the most common one that's been used in breeding. Some of them are just straight Lantana camara, and some of them are hybrids with a few other species. They're all native to mostly Central America, to the Americas, and over in Africa, but they've become pretty bad weeds in a lot of other tropical or semi-tropical areas around the world. Winter is the control for me here in Raleigh, so I don't really have to worry about these being invasive here, but certainly down in areas of Florida and up the Carolina coast, up to the North Carolina coast, they have become noxious weeds in those areas. The seeds are incredibly good at germinating. This plant is armed in a lot of different ways to make itself very good at being invasive. And so, you know, those of you in warmer areas, I'm trying to get you to not plant it if it's one that will, potentially end up as a problem in your area, or I'll talk about how to control that a little bit later in the video. Because, number one, this foliage is actually poisonous to horses, to goats, to deer, to, most of our mammals that will try to eat it. And they know not to eat it. They pretty much don't eat it. And therefore, this thing has an advantage over our native plants, which those native mammals and and grazing mammals have evolved with. And so that's one advantage it has. Then it also has the advantage of birds really love the little drupes. The flower, after the flowers form a seed and that seed matures, birds really love them. So they get dispersed by the birds and then nothing eats it, which leaves it in a very advantageous position. But enough of that. That's all negative. We're going to get that behind us because the rest of the country where we don't have them as invasive, they're just fantastic for blooming and blooming and blooming and really just being fantastic flowering plants that would draw tons of pollinators into our gardens. In that 150 species, most all of them are herbaceous perennials, meaning they'll die back to the ground. They don't really become woody. They just die completely back to the ground, or they're hardy shrubs, meaning they do get some woody material on them. Most of the ones that we're talking about that have become invasive are woody, really woody shrubs. Even the ones that I have in the garden here that are hardy, and we just cut them back to the ground during the winter time sometime. These flowers are arranged just like on other verbenas in this family of plants. These, what we would call, I think, a flower is actually lots of little florets gathered together like this, and we call this an umbel. So this is individual flowers arranged together. Again, it's what calls an umbel. These individual flowers will form a green berry, and that little drupe is actually, again, poisonous until it turns black later in the season and fully forms. It's a defense that the plant has to make sure the seed fully forms before something takes it. And so a bird then will disperse it out in the wild. The cool thing is these Lantana, here's a yellow one right here called bandana yellow. This one, you'll see these in red, you'll see them in orange, white, purple, bluish colors. Yellow, did I say yellow? Well, obviously we're looking at yellow, orange. And then some, interestingly, the flowers change color as they mature, and it creates a two-tone coloration within the flower. And so you need to watch these actually mature as they open up. Really, really kind of interesting. and inform those two-tone colorations. Again, this one's just a solid yellow. In the plant breeding, they've also crossed Lantana Camaro with some dwarf species and created some trailing ones, and so you see the trailing purple and trailing yellow lantanas as well. One of the beauties of these lantana is several times during the growing season, if you want to just kind of give them a haircut, you can, and they'll just flush back out from that, and you'll get more blooms than you previously had. This one's called Peach Glow. This is a Southern Living Plant Collection one. Gave it a haircut. It gotten a little bigger than I wanted to keep it right here. You know, it was up here, just cut it back. It's just branched in 25 new directions, and it's actually budded up on the end of every single one of these branches. This one tends to have multiple color flowers. Again, as they fade, you'll start with that solid kind of peach color flower, and then some of this yellow will form in the center, and then some of them will just become solid yellow over some period of time. So interestingly, you know, one of the great things about this lantana is all of the things that are going to visit it over the course of a season. You're going to get swallowtail butterflies, the yellow sulfurs, skippers. We're going to get honeybees. We're going to get native bees. We're going to get moths. We're going to get hummingbirds visiting these. Everything loves these flowers. It's incredible how many different things you will see at a lantana over the course of a summer. There are also Lepidoptera or caterpillars that will end up on them and do some damage to them, eating leaves on them, but ultimately become butterflies themselves. And so it is a host plant for several of those, even native caterpillars, which is kind of interesting as well. The flowers are lightly fragrant to me. I think people call them very fragrant sometimes, and I'll read that, and I get a little bit of fragrance from them, but I don't think they're particularly fragrant. They are very, very showy, especially when one's in full bloom. And we're, again, a week or so away from this one actually being in full bloom. But by this time of the season, a lot of our herbaceous perennials have just kind of burned out as the season's gone on. There are some fall blooming salvia and some other things that kind of kick in right about now, but I did salvia a couple of months ago in the middle of summer, so we're not going to do salvia again. And our butterfly bushes really continue to bloom very, very well into September, so they could have definitely been on my list of great flowering things for September, but definitely think lantana, because not only is the flowering still heavy, and we're still getting tons of pollinator activity around them, but the foliage also tends to look really, really great late into the season. A few more notes on the actual plant. Number one, the foliage is quite smelly. You know, I talk about the flowers being not so fragrant to me, really. The foliage is. If you break the foliage apart and smell it, it's quite strong. Would keep most things from trying to eat it. You know, I said it was poisonous, but most things aren't going to eat it. If you had goats, you know, goats can, you know, you always have to worry about goats because they'll sample anything. These are incredibly adaptable, and so that's another thing when the areas in the country where they are invasive that's kind of problematic, because they can grow in sandy beach areas, they can grow in riparian areas or wet areas, they can grow any place that's basically sunny. They can grow woodland edges. Again, wet areas, dry areas, all, you know, pretty much anywhere, and in different soil types from lower pH, acidic soils, and then slightly alkaline soils. So really, really adaptable to a lot of spaces, except for deep shade. In the deep shade, they're not going to perform very well. The plant will grow, but you're just not going to get many flowers on it. In zone 7, where I'm at, we can use these. A select group of them as perennial, so finding ones that are for zone 7. Miss Huff has always been probably the most common, most used perennial lantana in zone 7. New Gold, very, very common. Chapel Hill Yellow, which is kind of more of a butter yellow than the New Gold, where New Gold is very vibrant yellow. One called Carlos, it's actually got a similar kind of pink and two-tone flower to this one. There's one called Sunset that I know, Moselle. This is Chapel Hill Miss Huff right here, which is kind of a weird combo of that Chapel Hill Yellow and Miss Huff. This one has been reliably hardy for 2 seasons in this spot, and we had that situation last December where it had not gone to sleep and it got slammed to the ground with like an insta-frozen. and I didn't think it would come back from something like that, and it reliably did. So once you get a year under them, they're pretty easy. They're pretty reliable coming back in zone 7. Now, if you're in zone 4, 3, 4, 5, 6, you're not going to have a perennial lantana unless you're taking cuttings on them. They root very, very easily from cuttings, and I mean super, super easy from cuttings. You can take a piece like this and easily root it very, very quickly. Just remove the flowers on it because that's taking energy from it. That piece right there will root very, very quickly. So you could root it, try to keep it indoors through the winter, but for those of you up there in colder areas, this is just the perfect annual plant. This is 3 plants, and it takes up it's 10 foot this way and maybe 6 to 7 foot that way, and it's 3 feet tall, and it's just 3 plants. So you think about the dollar per dollar, what any other annuals that you're purchasing are never going to get this big. So I think it's definitely worth having. And then of course the trailing ones that you can use in containers or hanging baskets or whatever. And you're not in an area where they're going to be problematic because they're going to die. The winter is going to take care of them. The seed will never form and never mature, and they won't come back from that seed anyway in colder areas. So lantana, definitely. Again, you can see the 3 that we have out here, the 3 varieties that we have out here right now, just how great the foliage looks in a very tired garden. If I showed you the rest of the garden right now, so many of the perennials are just kind of, the annuals are done. Everything is done. It's like, please let us lose the leaves and go on. And here we are, for another month and a half, this lantana will be doing this out here in the garden. And I could cut it even now. Give it a bit of a haircut again, and it would just flush back out and immediately start blooming again. So lantana, September flowering plant of the month. What's your favorite flowering plant in the month of September? Let us know down below. Thanks for watching.